supra-international one world company limited. So that's where we're at with Greece.
All right, and moving along to other areas of Europe?
Well, one of the, needless to say, the motor of European economy, Germany, and Angela Merkel, the Germans have learned their lessons over the past, going back to the First World War of the 1923 crisis in Germany, the Second World War, the Versailles Pact, how Helmut Kohl was pressured by Margaret Thatcher and George H.W. Bush, and Mitterrand actually pressured and threatened into actually accepting the euro instead of a Deutschmark against his better judgment. And so Merkel is actually, she's doing her best to make sure that now that Germany is in a position that it is in, they simply are not willing, to be paying out and being the banker for all these deadbeat countries. So what the German government is, they're determined not to be the paymasters for Europe's debt transgressors in the long term. Now, officials at the Chancellery and Finance Ministry fear that otherwise the German public's support for the euro and the European community would be undermined. And also, not only that, but actually there's a couple of court cases being brought up in front of the Supreme Court in Germany. If actually that goes through, Germany itself may not have to participate and actually will be able to leave Europe from. I'm actually trying to find the exact term and the exact name of the case amongst my papers, and I can't find it right now. Anyway, so fearing a lasting burden on taxpayers, the German government is preparing a set of insolvency rules for the countries in the Eurozone. And again, these are some of the things which were discussed after the Bilderberg conference ended on the 6th of June. A small clique of top Bilderbergers, they went off to this super private hotel in Gerona, that's northern Catalonia, about 40 miles north of Barcelona, and then continued until Wednesday. That's for another 3.5 days, discussing exactly how some of these ideas of creating this, what you and I talked about before, two-tier Europe will be orchestrated and will be presented to the media. And one of the ideas that has come out of that meeting and is being actually put forth through the private channels for now by the German government is it would require private investors to bear some of the financial burden and force the affected countries to give up some sovereignty. Now imagine that. If you're Greece, if you're Spain, if you want to actually pay your bills, you're going to have to give up some of your sovereignty. How do you see that?
It's ridiculous, but that's absolutely fascinating what you just revealed. So what you're saying is that in fact there was a sort of a secretive Bilderberg after Bilderberg.
Well, it's actually, it's not the first time. They usually do it a lot, especially in times of crisis. You have the inner circle, the top 20, 30 members who actually continue discussing because, again, as I said to you before, out of the 120 attendees, a very small number of people actually understand that there's an organized structure behind Bilderbergers, and it's not just some debating society of, out-of-work former government employees. Now, going back to Germany, the first national bankruptcy on European soil, which, needless to say, I'm talking about Greece, was only prevented because the remaining countries in the Eurozone came to the aid of the faltering fellow member with billions in loans and loan guarantees. Now, the Chancellor, Angela Merkel, that is, she's determined not to allow the Greek debacle to be repeated elsewhere. And, of course, by elsewhere, she means exactly Spain and exactly Portugal. And Spain's debt is actually 3 times as much as Greece's debt. And if they needed $750 billion to save Greece, imagine how much money they need to save Spain. That's one of the reasons about 3 weeks ago you had the second in command of the United States Treasury, you had the president of the European Central Bank, the members of the International Monetary Fund, all coming to Spain to discuss with the president of Zapatero exactly how this, the survival plan is going to be put forward. Because needless to say, what they want to know is, how Zapatero and Spain are going to pay back the monies that they can actually borrow. Because needless to say, a lot of the Bilderberg members agree that Greece simply won't be able to pay the debts, and they'll most likely will default on their loans. And again, the Chancellor, she's determined not to allow the, what happened in Greece to be repeated in Spain and in Portugal. And what she's proposed is the establishment of a procedure to ensure what she calls orderly national bankruptcies. Now, Merkel hopes that the plan would create an important incentive for the Eurozone members to keep their budgets under control. Again, some unprecedented developments. Before, again, we had nation-state republics with our flags, our currencies, our constitutions. Now you have this one, super-European state called European Community. And now within this European community, you have this two-tier Europe, the first division, the top echelon, the richest of the rich. And then you have the great unwashed nation version, Spain's and Portugal's. And then within these Spains and the Portugals, they're saying, well, if you want some money, you have to give up your firstborn child or some of your freedoms. Imagine where we are today.
Absolutely. Well, imagine that, the global economic meltdown being used as an excuse to centralize power. Who would have predicted that? Yeah. Well, okay. So a lot of analysts were really surprised by the UK siding with the Europeans against the Americans at the G20 for the austerity, the round of austerity that they want to bring in. The Americans were arguing for continued stimulus. Was that break something that was discussed at Bilderberg?
Well, what we're seeing right now, and again, especially people, in the old days, in the days of the Soviet Union, and the evil empire, so to speak, you had the American experts and in Russian foreign policy, who'd read Pravda, and by reading a three-line a quote on page 16, they could tell you exactly what Russia's foreign policy is going to be over the next 6 months or so. Well, for anybody who's actually watching very carefully the geopolitical tectonic plates, you could tell right now how dangerous and how grave the situation is, because these old formal lasting friendships between Americans and the British and the French and the Israelis, and that no longer is the case. I can tell you from my experiences in Africa, in places like Sudan, the America's their enemy in Sudan is the Israelis, and the Israelis are fighting the British, and the British are fighting the Russians, and the Russians are Chinese, and they're all fighting for the same, piece of land that has oil. And it's the same thing at the G20 meeting. It's the same thing that happened on the G8. It's the idea that every member for himself is just trying to save their own hides. They're no longer interested because they simply can't afford these temporary partnerships for profit or for loss in this particular case, because they don't know if there's going to be, if this, down cycle is going to come around in time for UK in this particular case, to reap some benefit of of giving up their national interests in favor of the United States, which is why, again, it's not surprising at all why Germany, has broken with France, and although France and Sarkozy are threatening Germany, Germany is saying, hey, we're looking after, number one, which is Germany in this particular case. UK is doing the same thing. Even Canada and Harper, who is basically, an Obama lackey, who's just a George W. Bush lackey, from the Calgary School, which is the same as Chicago School of Economics. He very much said to them, bugger off. We're going to go and we're going to do what's best for our country, because all of these nations are terrified of the consequences. They're seeing in the United States, people are rising up and saying to the politicians, we're going to kill you. And they simply don't want the same to happen in their countries.
Exactly. Well, I could talk with you about this for hours, but I know you have to get going very shortly here. So before you go, I wanted to ask about a potential golden nugget in your Bilderberg report. You say, quote, another Bilderberger reminded the attendees of what happened on May 6, 2010, to the Dow Jones when it collapsed 10% in 16 minutes, wiping out $700 billion. It was not a fluke, end quote. Do you have any other info about that and what was discussed?
Well, yes, I do. And, you and I, because our brains work fairly well, most of the time. When somebody tells you that the markets drop 10% in 60 minutes because someone somewhere pressed, wrong key in a computer terminal, you have to be, as we say in Russian, not on very friendly terms with your brain to actually believe this nonsense. Because, imagine you go into the bathroom to brush your teeth, you come out and the world has collapsed. It actually, the magic word is the derivatives. Now, the root of the problem are the super banks and a dramatic increase in derivative market trading. Now, derivatives are highly speculative, high-risk financial instruments, which combined with unchecked regulatory safeguards have contributed the most to the destruction of the world's economy. Now, at the end of 2009, there were $294 trillion in derivatives at the United States banks, according to the OCC, which is the Office of Control of the Currency. Now, few government institutions will admit that the financial bailout in the United States has been intended to protect those derivatives. So that's a surprise. Now,